Look around. Nearly everything you see is from a country other than your own. International ships carry roughly 90% of global trade by volume and produce 2% of global CO2 emissions annually. That's greater than the seventh largest emitting country. Neither international treaties nor domestic policies control CO2 emissions from international maritime shipping. The industry is global in nature, is intrinsically tied to the global economy, and contains opaque webs of ownership sometimes spanning multiple continents for one vessel. The world's countries have delegated the control of CO2 emissions from international vessels to the International Maritime Organization. But after 2 decades of discussion, the Forum has done little beyond implementing mandatory efficiency standards. And despite these gains in efficiency, emissions may increase by up to 50% by 2050 unless further action is taken. Since international politics of reducing CO2 emissions involves countries, enhancing mitigation of CO2 emissions from international shipping could involve allocating these emissions to countries based on the location of a shipping actor. We analyze 5 national allocation options and, for the first time, use spatially resolved data to understand how each option might impact national carbon budgets. We carry out our analysis in the context of the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Our results show that a clear majority of CO2 emissions would be distributed to 10 countries under each of the allocation options we examined. However, the top 10 countries vary across the 5 allocation options, as do the effects. China and the United States would see less than a % increase to their carbon budgets across all options, whereas the carbon budgets of some low-emitting countries would increase by a factor of tens of thousands, in the flag option in particular. OECD countries would receive the majority of CO2 emissions under 3 of the options, whereas non-OECD countries would receive the most CO2 emissions under 2 of the options. Based on an analysis of objectives, principles for decision-making, and geographical coverage of both the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the International Maritime Organization, we conclude that there are strong reasons for the UNFCCC to implement any future allocation scheme. We also conclude that allocating CO2 emissions to the owner country best meets the criteria related to equity and effectiveness. While any allocation option may be politically difficult, it's important to address all CO2 emission sources in order to meet the Paris Agreement's temperature goals. Thus, new and more ambitious measures are necessary. Further research could explore how responsible actors could implement concrete strategies or technologies to accelerate the reduction of CO2 emissions from international shipping.